Welcome to the Brand Builders Podcast. It is me, your co-host, Tim Montgomery. Sorry, correction, Tom Montgomery. And I am here with my esteemed co-host and colleague, Preston P. Rutherford. Preston, say
Hello.
hello.
Hello. Thank you. Hello. Hello. I'm very happy to be here.
Preston, how's
Hello.
life?
Yes.
One word
Life
answer.
is great. Good.
Great. Good. Excellent. Well, thank you for that, Preston. Today, we are going to continue our explorations of how to build brand in this day and age and how to do so with a performance marketing mindset. And that's, as you all know, that's what we're here to do here on the Brand Builders Podcast. So buckle up, hold on to your butts, and get ready for a wild ride. Today, we are following up on our last episode, and who knows if there's going to be continuity in our episodes. We may be releasing these sporadically. We may be chopping them up for content to slang everywhere else. But last episode, if you're listening, and there is a canonical history of this, we talked about Kellogg on branding in a hyper-connected world, a book that was formative for how we approach things in the early days at Chubbies as kind of young, wet behind the ears whelps. We've done a couple of dives into this book, and we're just kind of going sequentially through it, pulling out interesting tidbits. So this was on section 2. That's all about branding. Sorry, I need to look back up the exact title of the section. Because it is on Kellogg on branding is about branding. I think it's about brand design. Is that right? Am I right? Oh, bringing your brand to life. Section 2, bringing your brand
Section
to
2.
life. And so in here, there were a lot of really kind of meaty sections, meaty chapters. Bringing your brand design and thinking, leveraging touch points in today's branding, connections between the brand and the self. Building strong brands through advertising and digital advertising in particular, digital brand storytelling, and then a piece on branding services in the digital era, which we didn't spend a ton of time digging into. But all about kind of the how to architect and craft brand. And so that's what we're going to talk through is Kellogg on branding's take on how to architect and craft brand, what it's like kind of the modern toolkit, how to infuse storytelling, how to think through your audience's psychology as you're building content and narratives for them to kind of latch onto. Hopefully it's useful. We're probably going to give like our take on, hey, here's what resonates still. You know, I think it's probably 15 years since we last read this book, or maybe some very long time. So a full sophomore in high school's age since I last read this, and so there's some things that I'm reading and I'm like, well, I kind of disagree with that now, and there's some things that I'm like, yes, like this is so simple, and every brand should do this, and yet most brands likely aren't. So hopefully this can be a cool reminder, as it was for us. And full disclaimer, we don't claim to be experts. We're not, fluffing up our own feathers here. We're talking and exploring concepts we think are important because we almost went out of business at Chubbies. And one of the reasons for that was kind of misunderstanding the way to think about brand. Even coming from a place where at Chubbies, I think we started with a lot of intuition and a lot of kind of what you need to build a lasting brand. And still, we almost just got it like royally wrong. Luckily, we got it right and had some good success. And so hopefully we can kind of impart at least our take, our knowledge, to the extent that it's useful, and hopefully drive new action. That's the intent of this podcast, is really drive new action, drive new behaviors for anybody who cares to listen, whether that's one person, 10 people, or the whole GD world.
Correct. That's right.
So,
and one, just maybe to cut you off there rudely,
do it.
I would like to further a point you made ever so slightly, which is talking about our experience and the whole, almost going out of business thing. The reason why we talk about this stuff, like why are we talking about brand in the first place, is it is going to help your company generate more profits because people are now going to purchase from you because they have connected you to a particular product. And so the purchase decision is no longer a rational comparison based process. It is, I think shorts, I get Chubbies. And because that thought process starts to happen, that only happens when you've built a strong brand, the amount of money you have to pay to get that revenue compresses. And that's where contribution comes from. That's where profit comes from. And that's how more businesses, more brands can grow, flourish, survive. So this is all to help you make more money. It's not to build brands for the sake of learning about some theory. It is a fundamentally money driving, growth driving, existential initiative. So that's the why. And hopefully by connecting it to, your company, your pocketbook, your goals in your business, maybe the ears will perk up a little bit. I'll step off of my soapbox now.
Get on that soapbox. I agreed, and thank you for calling that out. I think the other way that I've thought about it, and these are all like ex post facto, I think, learnings for us, because while we were in it, we were in it, and not able to be a bit more circumspect about things. But I think like we always took it as obvious fact that in the world of retail, your product has to be excellent, right? You have to have great designers. You have to have great creative people working on your product. Great engineers, if that's the sort of product you sell, etc. And that's like a non-negotiable. And so when people are the like, how do you build great product? It's like, that's not a question we get too often. Is the, how do I think about this importance? Like, how should I foot great product in my business and things like that? Because it's just so obvious that you need that, because it's the thing that people are celebrating and enjoying and using and whatever. I think for us, it's become just as existential and just as central to make sure you have a great brand, and you have the DNA and you're building the DNA internally to be able to build great brand. And those are the two non-negotiables. How to run media, how to do a bunch of other things, you can learn on the fly, and those are more negotiable. And as evidenced by all the billion ways that brands become successful, only a tiny sliver of which, and TBD on degree of success, coming from just like performance paid media. The non-negotiables are brand and product come back over and over and over. And so not just profitability to us, it's like existential. If you want to have a business and an asset that, regardless of whether or not it's you running this thing for the next 30 years, it's an asset that you need to be able to convince some other people that it needs to last for 30 years, if it's not the case. And that's the moat you have in this world. So anyway, we'll both step down from our respective soapbox eye. Cool. Well, I'll kick it over to you, Preston, to kind of open up this conversation on section 2, all about bringing the brand to life.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And maybe to kick it off ever so briefly, to add additional context and orientation to what we'll be talking about today, because, okay, again, financial goal, how you do it, this is why. Now we're going to get a little deeper, maybe a little bit theoretical even, with some examples. But we've established the why. So maybe just to guide the section 2 by just regurgitating the names of each of the titles, but I think it's somewhat helpful. I'll do that now. Chapter 7, so we're doing 7 to 12. Chapter 7 is around design cues. Chapter 8, touch points, so talking about triggers, customer journey, goals along the journey. 9 is building a connection between brand and self. 10 is one that we did in a previous episode, but it's called building strong brands through strategy in the online age. 11, digital brand storytelling. So talking about stories. A lot of people talk about brand. Tell your story. What is that?
You ever heard about
And then,
story?
yeah, you heard about it? Have you ever told a story? And then 12, branding services in a digital era. I couldn't find anything interesting there, but it's a chapter and it exists, so I will name it. But it's relevant, actually. I shouldn't be poo-pooing anything. Now, my first interesting topic to throw your way is what stood out for me. Number one was just getting into chapter 9, this idea of linking brand to self. And there was a small tidbit that I kind of copy pasted that I might use to kick off this segment. It says, successful brands connect to consumers by linking to primary motives that drive consumer behavior. Here,
P-motes.
emotes. Here we discuss 3 such primary motives. Number 1, coherence, which is, AKA, the need to, excuse me, let me begin again, which is, AKA, the need for clarity and certainty about the self. This will also double as a therapy session. Number
Who am
2,
I?
what am I
What do
doing
I
here?
like? What do I do?
Why am I here? Number 2, agency, the need for individual competence and achievement that we all
I
share.
am
And
neat.
number 3,
I am great.
exactly.
I am
I am great.
athletic.
I am
I
smart.
know who I am, and it is great.
I provide value to this world. And number 3, primary motive number 3, communion, the need for social acceptance.
I am great, and other
You,
people think I am great. You know I'm great.
and everyone tells
Just
me
kidding.
so.
That's true.
So
True.
so primary motives and that drive consumer behavior, and not just when I actually read consumer behavior, I was like, like purchase consumers, but no, like human behavior. I think is the word that they meant to use. So I will just correct their text for them. But these being the fundamental drivers of our behavior, nicely distilled down here. So like coherence, consistency, how we see ourselves, agency, our ability to actually do things, be effective in the world and community. Excuse me, this idea of acceptance and being a part of a group, right? So cool. Like let that simmer and marinate because when I just read those words, it was just sort of like, oh, okay, this provides a vocabulary, just a set of words that connect to all these ideas that we as marketers have in our heads for all of the stuff that we generally have been already doing, maybe missing the mark every once in a while because we didn't necessarily have clearly defined ways to describe these things. But many of the stuff that we've been doing and much of the value, I should say, of books like this, at least for me, is somewhat of like a cathartic, oh, okay, now I know how to talk about that jumbled up idea that has existed in our heads for a while. So anyways, I will make that point and put that aside. The other, so part number 2 that I thought was an interesting point, and then maybe I'll drive it to like, so what, is this inward or outward from a motive perspective? So it's like, I am me, and so like how do I view myself, and then external, outward, like how do others view me? So then you have this cool little table that brings these things together. And it's actually kind of cool. So I would check it out. I'm not going to read it to you, but those are the general ideas, the general frameworks. So like the so what, and some ideas around maybe why it's interesting and what you can do with this information. I think one of the takeaways that I already mentioned is you've probably already been appealing to some of these motivations in your existing work, one of my takeaways, in addition to laying out the idea of these primary motives, which when you connect to them and appeal to them and target them, you then connect brand to self. And like the so what on connecting brand to self, right, is you strengthen, you're able to create that connection when you connect brand to self of whatever. Coke equals happy moments. Chubbies equals awesome, fun shorts that you wear on vacations and on the weekend. All of these associations. To make the connect, you have to make the connection so that the purchase decision can happen in the way you want it to, without having to prompt with bottom funnel DR ads that appeal to product offer urgency. So that's why it's important to connect brand to self, and that's why this framework matters, because it provides structure, so that when you do your next marketing thing, you have a higher hit rate of success on creating that linkage. Great. So where my mind started to go, and where I tend to default sometimes, is like, okay, I now have all of this information. Let's do all of it all the time. And principle one that they give, which I think is a helpful focuser, is just target one motive, just sort of like nail coherence, like inward coherence, or nail outward agency, right? Just sort of like nail that, hone it, get really good at communicating that idea, appealing to it, getting consistent and known for doing that, because you're probably going to be pretty poopy at it at the beginning. Everything we do at the beginning is pretty bad. So I thought that was a helpful takeaway for me. And then the second part, as they went through maybe 8 or 9 different principles appealing to these primary motives, or thinking about acting on these primary motives, was principle 4, the idea of using the brand to compensate for threats to self-concept, which, and I'm probably not defining this in the absolute correct fashion, but one of the things that, just to kind of like apply it to a Chubbies context, that was so, I think, central to the things that we were doing, was this notion of like dealing with stress, and how do I view myself, and kind of like, who am I in the context of being a professional? How do I operate? Can I be like my fun self, or do I have to, when I throw on pants and show up into this meeting, do I have to be this certain thing? And then what's the impact of that? And then how can we effectively, as a brand that represents fun, levity, weekend freedom, how are we then helping in the context of whether it be coherence or the conflict or the threat of coherence, in terms of like, Jesus, who am I? And how do I self-actualize within the context of all of these constraints in the life that I live? And then there's a tension there, and there's the tension and release there that gets really interesting. I know I'm getting very technical, but it just really kind of, again, provides a vocabulary for some of the things that we did knowingly and consciously to a certain extent, but also somewhat subconsciously, so that now that there's more of a vocabulary to it, hopefully it can be conveyed and communicated to other brand builders out there who are exploring ways to appeal to these primary motivations, again, so that your brand can get connected to hopefully a prospective customer's view of self, and then they'll purchase from you without you having to buy that transaction, which we all love. So that is one of the things I thought was interesting, connecting brand to self, the 3 primary motivators, and then the internal and external version of those, and then a couple notes on some principles that you might think about applying as you engage upon your journey of connecting brand to self. But that's just me yammering on. I'm just curious. I mean, any reactions, Tom?
That's just me. That's just me.
I'm just one man.
This is just B-Rev. So I thought it was useful to kind of lay out the principles, and so for risk of bastardization of them, I'm just going to read them. And so this is 7 principles for building strong self-brand connections. Principle 1 is target 1 motive, which Preston you mentioned. Principle 2 is target life transitions for powerful self-brand connections. And the way I internalized this was like there are moments where you're encountering a new aspect of yourself, right? Where you're asking the question of who am I as this person now? Who am I as an employee? Who am I as a college student? Who am I as a father? Who am I as a husband?
Right.
These are all these new opportunities to start to define self in new ways. I thought that was an interesting take on kind of principle 2 of like, hey, if there's space to occupy, like, you know, kind of enter that fray. Principle 3, use the brand to bridge self-concept conflicts. And so this is, I think one of the examples they use is like a working mother sort of idea, potentially being kind of self-concepts that are in conflict, which should not be the case, but be that as it may, culturally, that maybe that is prominent. And so a brand that comes in and kind of gives that reinforcement of working moms being okay, that actually being kind of copacetic combination of self. Use the brand to compensate for threats to the self-concept. Principle number 4. Principle 5, design distinct and exclusive brand communities. Kind of interesting, of like identifying who you are and that being different from who everybody else is. They used Harley Davidson as an example of kind of like outlaws, and we all know like the dudes who ride Harleys and whatnot, and we all aspire to be them, of course. Apple's like culture in general up until they became mainstream. And so there's something interesting there around like what is cool and coolness kind of being necessarily not mainstream, sort of thing. It's kind of interesting to think about. 6, use multifaceted brand storytelling. And so I'll talk to you kind of my take on kind of actions from that, but using consistent themes, but in different ways, I think is the way I took that. And then principle 7, incentivize brand usage. And so how do you incentivize kind of more and more reps, more and more awareness to enter into this concept of self? So
You're muted.
was I muted the whole time?
No.
Oh.
Just for 2 seconds.
What in the hell?
You were just transitioning after talking through all of the principles.
At any rate, one of the things that I thought was really interesting, and I'm kind of continually compelled by, is just like the degree to which, and it's easy to forget this, the degree to which all of what we're doing, whether you're a media company, whether you're a brand, when you're putting stuff out there for people to react to and build connections to, you're operating on like hardware that has been evolved over, hundreds of thousands of years. And it's all comes down to kind of neuroscience, really, is like, okay, how do people form memory structures? What are those most salient memory structures? What does it mean when somebody likes something? Like when you like something, why the hell is that an evolutionary thing, right? Why is that valuable to you in evolutionary terms? And I think particularly when it starts to come to my dog probably doesn't have a really strong sense of self, unique among other dogs, that they really care about. And so I think self starts to become like a social concept. And I think that's one of the things that is really distinct about human beings and other, primates, chimpanzees, and things like that. But I think human beings probably have the most evolved kind of social structures and things like that, where self identifies your people, right? And gives you a way to place yourself in the world, which is very interesting. And so like, I kind of took all of the lenses as like, again, good vocabulary. So like coherence, agency, community, etc., like good lenses to think through what is like inherently a non-labelable idea, which is like the neurobiology of self and like what that means. But it is an interesting lens to think through of like it's kind of the way that I think about like news, right? Like And you know, there was like the famous blue Facebook, red conservative or right leaning. Then all the news articles you like and see are very right leaning, and that's such a central idea to a lot of people's identities. That's what they like because it lines up with their identity. It's not like a really complex math there.
Right.
And
right.
and similarly on the blue side of things, the liberal side of things, all the news and all the posts were about the things that those people would like or have reactions to. And so I thought that was a really effectively lining yourself up with self is really important because it's very evocative in the framing of this is why I like something, and why I like something a lot is because I identify with it a lot. It embodies my values a lot. This is the way that I think about myself a lot. And I think the tenet I take from that is a couple, but one is like those are strong emotions you're talking about. It's not like a
Right.
functional purpose. It's not like that is all system one thinking. Like who am I is not it's not something you've written out as a blueprint in a Word doc sort of thing. It's very intuitive, and you react to things you like, you react to things you don't like, and you just feel a certain way about certain topics and certain things and certain jokes and certain pieces of content or whatever. And so like the degree to which that's emotional and like system one versus rational, I think is really, really powerful. And so like you can have a gizmo that does all the cool functional things that it possibly could do. But if there's not also that kind of emotional affect, that delight, that appeal to emotion and identity and things like that, brand is tougher to come by. And the second kind of interesting thing that I made me think about was familiarity, right? I think as self, you're very familiar with the concepts that define you. You're very familiar with the things that appeal to yourself. You're very familiar with the things that you like and things like that. And so kind of I think one of the things I'm always stricken by is this like surprising connection to the familiar, and the surprising take on the familiar, or the kind of core to self, is a really interesting way to kind of think about how to access that and how to form a new memory structure in line with that. Because I think there's a je ne sais quoi that has to accompany how to be retained in memory. And I think there's this like kind of element of surprise sort of thing that kind of comes up time and again in comedy, and comes up in a lot of different ways of like strong emotions. And so it's like combining the familiar and the foreign sort of thing. Anyway, so that's a bit of a diatribe. I think the actionable takes I had from this is I thought the idea of like thinking about the internal versus external is really good. Of like, is your product about who you are as a person and your own psychology, or is it about how you fit into the group more kind of explicitly? Is it about good times with friends? Is it about that sort of thing? Versus this is who you are, and this gives you more self-confidence in who you are, sort of thing. And creatively, like this is a good lens to think through. Is like, in your creative, literally, are you addressing a single person, or are you addressing a group of people? At Chubbies, we did a lot of like experimentation, and saw different results depending on different setups with different amounts of people and things like that. I think there's something really telling in that. The other piece that I thought through was like asking the question of, how does your brand help your customer tell this story about their core identity, right? Like, how do you fit into that? So one of the examples they use is like, I'm a runner. I'm really passionate about running. Nike fits nicely into that story, particularly Nike running. And so product is inherently related to how that fits into the story, but also then how Nike presents it is really powerful. And so how do you help them tell their story about, here's who I am? And particularly when it comes to like clothing and things that are visible, clothing, shoes, whatever, watches, those sorts of things. While that that statement can sometimes be for yourself. You're wearing a Nike t-shirt for that person, or a Nike running t-shirt for that person. It kind of tells you a little bit about, it tells the world a little bit about who you are and what you care about. And that's interesting.
Totally. I'm curious. You mentioned, because as we sometimes get comments or people asking us about more of the nuance or the specific behind the scenes at Chubbies, one of the things you started hinting at, and maybe my question is around, maybe go a little deeper, help the listeners maybe understand. You mentioned the experimentation around the internal, external, which of the primary motivators, experimentation, testing, thinking through it. Maybe any additional, I don't know, specifics or lessons or ways that other brand builders, operators might think through how to find this for them based upon the Chubbies experience?
Yeah, like I think for my part, experimentation is always at the centerpiece of everything that we do. And so if I'm a brand builder, the first thing that I'm asking the question of is, what's my story? Why did I get interested in this? And what do I find compelling about both the product that we're selling and like the brand white space that I think is out there, or the thing that I feel most viscerally? And so when we were brainstorming Chubbies, we always had a brand concept tied to the product, right? It wasn't merely shorter men's shorts. They were shorter men's shorts with an attached like middle finger to the rest of the world of men's fashion that we felt kind of thoroughly, let's see, like not rejected by, but thoroughly unwelcome in.
Right.
And then meanwhile saw a whole generation of men, namely our fathers, who didn't know a thing about men's fashion and didn't give one shit whatsoever, grew out heavy mustaches and long hair, cut off their jeans to wear tiny jean shorts, and went out and cranked a couple of beers on the river, sort of thing. And so that was a great mascot for us, and a great kind of symbol for us to go appeal to. I think also, while I think a lot of times fashion is a social product, I think oftentimes what we, and maybe there's nuance to this, but like I think what we, if I'm like rationalizing this ex post facto, I think what we were really focused on was the internal kind of sense of self, of confidence, and wear what you want to wear, and why, like the illogic that we saw with like cargo shorts and long shorts was just so jarring. It's like, why does this make sense? Wear something that's functional. Wear something that, like, if you're wearing shorts, wear shorts. Like, if you want to wear pants, wear pants. Like, don't combine them.
Half-assing has never worked in life. It doesn't work
Right.
here.
Exactly. And so I think even though it like I think a lot of the manifestation sometimes was very social, and like a lot of like wearing Chubbies in groups of people, like in friend groups, made a ton, like was a big thing. The way we thought about it was very much about I think the internal narrative, as opposed to the external of check me out and don't you think I'm so neat. It's more about wear what makes you feel good, and like there's no way those make you feel good. Those are worn only out of that second path. That's like, I want to fit in. I don't want to show my legs off because maybe my legs aren't the best legs or whatever. It's just a silly concept that like, those are your legs. Like, that's whatever they are. They're your legs. Just fucking wear shorts, man. And so I think we very much focused on the internal narrative. And so it kind of, as I think back, like a lot of times like group shots just didn't work for us. And particularly when you didn't have like a hero in the narrative, when you didn't have like sometimes you could like have a setting, but you had to have a hero who you were focused on. Anyway, so like how to appeal that to the business, I think it's like thinking back to the what are you building? What are you connecting really viscerally with? What is the emotional white space? And I would think about that from both a product perspective and a brand perspective. Like, what's the white space from both of those? What's something visceral? I really like the idea of bridging the gap between kind of conflicting ideals, particularly because those tend to evolve over time. And cultural trends can kind of create different manifestations of things. And I think some of the best brands can participate in interesting cultural trends and help bridge that gap. One of the other things I thought was really just a cool framing of an ad campaign, because I think like a lot of times advertising can be seen it can be looked upon as though it's like whatever, malicious or not super great because you're convincing people to buy things, sort of thing. But like at the end of the day, you're also trying to sell tickets to movies and things like that. And so like, yep. One of the things that I thought was really cool was like the exact opposite of that was like how the Nike Just Do It campaign has become, and it has for a lot of people, like a mantra for doing the impossible or doing the thing that you're the most scared of doing, like popping the question, starting a business, quitting your job, like whatever these things are that you're afraid to do. It gives a mantra to kind of do that thing. And like, it's creativity, and creativity manifests in a lot of different ways. And so anyway, like I just thought that there was a lot of interesting affect that comes with that brand exploration that sometimes can feel like it's in service of something more shady, when if you're really feeling it, it's in service of something important. It's in service of something that connects, that that can drive passion and enthusiasm. Like what we're talking about is like sense of self. And these are like interesting kind of ways for people to codify their sense of self, feel confident in themselves. Just a really cool concept. So anyway, I would connect. I would figure out what you connect with.
Yep. Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, just to your point, the implications of Just Do It in all those different examples, and then connecting to something that's important. It's a little bit of a mindset shift on the understanding that, yeah, your company, you as humans with an organization creating the brand can have this important impact on the world. And that can, to a certain extent, maybe doesn't necessarily have to be the primary driver, but what I thought was interesting, or what I pulled out of it, is like, oh, you could be digesting this as the listener. Okay, so I got to learn these things so that I can, and I'm being somewhat hyperbolic, but so that I can manipulate these minds out there so that they will connect my brand to themselves, and therefore they will come to my site and I will hypnotize them, and they will just start blindly typing my URL into their browser. No, it's maybe that is somewhat of an output, not the hypnotizing and manipulation, but because you helped this improvement in view of self, helping a person better self-actualize or whatever it might be, like that service to humanity, you then get to be the beneficiary of that positive impact that you had on the human. Nike gets to sell more shoes because they help more people try a slam dunk or whatever it might be, get out there and run. I thought that was an interesting shift to the way that some of this information might potentially be digested.
Yeah. Well, and like I think it's juxtaposed against, performance marketing, direct response advertising, which has a tendency to try and be capitalizing on impulse and this concept of like triggers and things like that, that they talk about in this as well. Is what's the thing that gets to go, and this is where like discounts and sales come in and stuff like that, which like of course you have to do, but what I love about the process of branding, one of the reasons that I just love this topic and loved so much of what we did at Chubbies and what we learned about there, is that this process of branding is the kind of that creative process. It's like, put this creative out, and it's not something that is manipulative. It's, are you connecting in the right way? Are you giving people delightful experiences? And at Chubbies, we had so many customer stories come in that were like, about how we helped people feel more confident. I won't like go deep because it starts to feel a little bit like too patting yourself on the back sort of thing, but just a lot of people whose lives were changed by like us putting out some of this ridiculous content that its only aspiration was to make you smile, and like laugh and like have a great time. There's something so cool about that. And I think the other piece that it's so nice to see is just like, yeah, that's also the stuff that works in building these connections. Now, that's not the stuff that works on the trigger, right? Like the thing that is like, get them to buy now. Like it's correct. Like that's not what that is. And so you do have to have that. And there are a lot of different ways to go about that. That we'll talk about in another episode, but it's really cool to see this process of branding and building emotional connection is so kind of purely creative.
Yep, totally. So in the minutes we have, one of the ways I was thinking we might close the episode is around, tactical application. So great, connecting brand to self. Totally want to do the shit out of that. So now how? One of the closing lines that I really appreciated was just around storytelling, and just this obvious little quippy hot take that is, we are not suffering from a lack of brand storytelling. We are suffering from bland storytelling. And then okay, great. The so what is so that we can actually we can apply all of this stuff that we've just learned about in a systematic approach, a systematic story process where, so my setup, and I'll hand it to you, is there may be an assumption that, I mean, I guess like for a TikTok video, you're like, okay, it means this sort of thing happening in the hook, and then this has to happen. Kind of slightly different in that this is applying a framework, set of creative constraints to creativity, which can sometimes be in tension, where you're just like, okay, I just got to be totally open to the creativity that's going to hit me. But it's like, no, I think one of the ways that we found a lot of success at Chubbies was like turning this into a structure, having a specific dependent variable that we were looking to improve that was tied to specific business and financial results we were looking to drive. And then once you have that feedback loop, you then go and you take a shit ton of shots on goal. So maybe from the how perspective, one of the things I saw that you had in your notes, it was pretty cool, was just sort of this idea of, the 7 stories, the story structure, the 3 acts, just maybe like it's effectively a blueprint that people can look up or take away from this episode that maybe just helps them be like, okay, yeah, I now have structure. I now have something that I can wrap my head around and define that I'm going to take into the office or into the Zoom meeting on Monday and apply going forward in the way we create content and the way we tell stories so that we can better connect our brand to self.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I would encourage everyone just to look up these. Like, these are well documented things, and,
Right.
and even I've read about these things, a billion times, and I'll forget like the specifics. And so like I want to print them out and put them somewhere.
Yeah.
And just like anytime you're building any piece of content, to have these things to think about of like, and it helps aid with like writer's block and content block and like what's the right way to manifest
Good
this
point.
idea. So anyway, there were kind of two concepts to tease out. First was like the story archetypes, right? Like it's the famous adage that like there are only really 7 stories in the world, and every story is just a different twist on those things. And the names of these stories are awesome, but you should look these up. But the 7 are Overcoming the Monster, Rags to Riches, The Hero's Quest, Voyage and Return, Comedy, Tragedy, and Rebirth. Those are 7. Now, like they called out the Apple's 1984 campaign as like this idea of quote unquote overcoming the monster. Or no, I think I think that was it. Maybe it was Just Do It. But it's effectively like you can defeat that terrible beast. And oh, by the way, maybe the terrible beast is your own psychology, and you can beat your own insecurities, or it's Big Brother / Microsoft trying to keep you down, sort of things. But I think it's a cool lens. It's like, okay, who am I? Who's the monster, right? Like there's a way to kind of think through what is overcoming the monster, fill in your characters, and what's the shortest amount of, like, particularly in like social, what's the shortest amount of time you can tell that story. And then so those are kind of the stories, and so you can kind of fill in the narrative. And then story structure is kind of a bit of this like appeal to what is drama and what is surprising and what is tension and things like that. And so there were two structures that they laid out. I think the one that I resonate most with is this kind of 5-part structure. A lot of times people think about it in terms of 3 acts, but I resonate really with the 5-part structure, which first there's an inciting incident. That's 1. 2, there's rising action. So things are getting heated, things are getting intense. 3, there's a climax. Whammo, whoa, this is the maximum intensity moment. Hold on to your butts. What's going to happen? 4, there's falling action. And so the kind of uncertainty that is post-climax. And then 5 is resolution. The end of the story. Do you think the hero is going to die or not? And it depends on the year we're in and what's going to be surprising. But it's going to be one of those two. And that's resolution. I really like those just to force yourself to think through them, even if it's a freaking LinkedIn posts, even if it's a 15-second piece of content you're putting out on TikTok, whatever. I would think through that, and you can accomplish that in a really fast way. 15 seconds is a lot of time. 30 seconds is even more, is double the amount of time, if you can believe it. And so tactically, I would for sure write out what are these things for every single video you're doing. And it's not to say your only successful videos are going to be videos that perfectly follow that structure, but it's really useful to fill in the blanks there. And it's something that's like so well known and so ingrained in storytelling for a reason. What did you think? What was your take on the storytelling side of things? Because we didn't go too deep into that, but they talk a lot about storytelling, and there's a full chapter on brand storytelling and how to kind of architect those things. Yeah,
I mean, there were this notion of 3 keys of storytelling: be human, be pervasive, be persistent. I don't know if there's that. I think that's relatively great. That's what I want to tell you.
I have failed. I did not pass initiative number 1. That was a human robot joke. I was affecting a robot voice, and that would have been in conflict with initiative number 1, which is be a human.
The listeners at home, what I was doing was actually a robot voice, and the reason I did that.
So, the best jokes are the ones you must explain immediately afterwards.
So what was funny about that is that was one thing. I'm just scrolling through because you had a lot of awesome notes too. But actually, what I did, there was this, and I don't have the specific David Ogilvy quote, but his point was just basically around like, as someone creating content, stop thinking that it's a crutch or that it's negative to use a very specific framework. It doesn't mean you're less good because you fit into. So he mentioned like Shakespeare and someone else who was like super legit, but that they both weren't less good because everything they wrote fit into a very specific framework. And the quote stuck with me, but obviously not enough to where I remember the exact quote. But
you remembered how you felt.
But I remember how I felt and how the pieces, I think you call it a memory palace, the home that was created in my mind of, okay, this is the thing. It's like, Shakespeare doesn't suck. No, he doesn't suck. Oh, he used this framework. Oh, interesting. I didn't actually know that. Wow, that's cool. I can actually apply this and not feel like my view of self is threatened. To tie it all back
was Shakespeare derivative?
Right.
Heck no.
Nope. So
I know Shakespeare.
I've heard of him before. I think you may have as well. That was my sort of like final thought. But why don't you close us out, Tom?
Let's see. I think to close us out, I really liked this section. This is the stuff that I just geek out on, which is like the psychology, the creativity, the way that brand building can do good, the way that content can do good out there in the world, and it doesn't have to be brand building, just content, in connecting with people, in and it's not even like helping, but in like reinforcing or giving people things to kind of incorporate into their sense of self that is like creative expression. And it's kind of both gratifying as the creator and gratifying as the createe, the receiver of the creative. And so it's just a really cool process, and I just love creativity. So I appreciated that. I appreciated some of the lenses to think through. I appreciated some of the things that you can just do, like templatize this stuff. And it doesn't mean that now all your content's going to be cookie cutter, because as what you said, kind of Shakespeare had a template, and so does Stephen King, if you read his book on writing. And that's okay. They're completely different people and completely different writers. But they help you understand these age-old psychological tenets that you can appeal to. Now, you can make decisions to break from those norms too, and sometimes that's effective. But filling in your template, I think, is really useful. So yeah, maybe that's kind of the kind of final manifestation is coming out of this with okay, here's my template for the motive I'm trying to appeal to. Here's the audience that I'm trying to appeal to who has this motive. Here's the way I'm appealing to these 7 principles, or this particular principle I want to nail. Here's how that's manifesting in storytelling. Here's my selection of, I'm doing hero's journey, I'm doing overcoming the monster, and then here's my inciting incident, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. Wham, bam, boom, bam, bang,
Bing, bam, boom.
And then go out and do it. And it might stink.
Yeah, it probably will at the beginning. But the cool thing, and I'll hand it back over to you, but that I like there is that on the surface, this may seem somewhat stifling to a very creative person. But I think anyone who's been doing it long enough knows how freeing it is to have these creative constraints. And so if you're newer to this process of figuring out how the hell to create content that people like, the fear associated with feeling like you have to be creative, this is kind of it's not magic. It's not coming down from on high. It's committing to this process with these frameworks, picking your goal, like that metric, and then just feedback loop, like doing it over and over and over, knowing that you're going to suck at the beginning. But then this framework now really helps you understand. I mean, this is like the proven stuff that works if you do it over and over and over again. So I think that's kind of cool. It's like a nice roadmap that you can apply to creativity and making that connection. So dug that.
Dig it. Yeah, for whatever reason, I got reminded of that Ed Sheeran clip that's gone around a little bit. It's like he's on a talk show, and they have I think a YouTube video of when he was young singing, and creativity, much like singing ability, is sometimes thought to be this like, oh, you're just born with it or not. Ed Sheeran demonstrates that you were not born with singing talent. So like his video, he's not singing particularly well as far as his standards. My standards, he's great, but that's the joke that they play, and they play like a funny video of him like his voice cracking and like not being on time and all sorts of stuff like that, and then he just sang a shit ton and got way better at it. And wrote a shit ton of songs. So anyway, channel your inner young Ed Sheeran and stick at it, even though it might not work at first.
Yeah. Makes me think of, and we should have this as a featured podcast, is just creativity and just the whole Pixar process from a content creation perspective, with the main takeaway and applicability of what we're talking about today being, we just know it's going to be shit at the beginning, and we expect that. You still got to put out that first version, and that's the only way that we can get to something that's great, is by putting out that thing that is shit. So anyways.
Dig it. Well, thank you, gentle and kind and good-looking listener, and hopefully you found something useful. Let us know if you did, and we will see you very, very soon with love in our hearts and creativity on the brain. We bid you adieu.
Adieu.